Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and Mooma Young. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at the 2016 horror, mystery, thriller, drama epic, The Wailing. The Wailing follows a police officer as he investigates a series of mysterious murders and illnesses that has rocked his small Korean village of Gokseong. Locals suspect a Japanese stranger who recently arrived has something to do with all the death, and the further he investigates, the more unclear it becomes what kind of evil has plagued the village. The Wailing was directed by Na Hong-jin, director of The Chaser and The Yellow Sea. Both films are very highly regarded and both have extreme moments of violence, but The Wailing is Na Hong-jin's first foray into true horror. He began constructing the plot of the movie after the passing of several close friends and reaching out to clergy of various religions. He was hoping to answer a question many of us asked during an unexpected death. The question of why this person at this place at this time, hoping to make some sort of meaning out of it. The film stars Kwak Do-won, who was also in The Yellow Sea. He and Na Hong-jin had gotten to know each other well after that, and Na Hong-jin knew he wanted him for the role of Jong-gu. The Wailing has a pretty large cast, and the near 3-hour runtime gives them plenty of time to be fleshed out. A few of them include well-known Korean actors Hwang Jeong-min, Chun Woo-hee, Kim Hwan-hee, and Japanese star Jun Kunimura, who you may recognize from Kill Bill or Audition. Due to the locations and weather conditions and the importance of atmosphere in the film, there were days where they were only able to film 1 or 2 takes of a single scene, and the entire film took 180 days to film. The only person more specific about shooting locations than Na Hong-jin was the leading cinematographer Hong Kyung-pyo, who would roam the forests in search of the perfect settings. And it paid off, as this movie is absolutely stunning. The Wailing was released in South Korea in May of 2016 and was a huge success. It also showed at the Cannes Film Festival and had a brief tour in America. It made a worldwide box office total of $51 million, way over its $8 million budget. It was met with pretty much universal acclaim and won and was nominated for a ton of awards. It currently has a 99 and 82% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I'd say it's pretty deserving of those stats. Obviously, no movie is perfect, but I went in with high expectations and was not disappointed. There is just so much going on. It's definitely not a film you can watch passively. I'm sure the length will deter some people immediately, but I would say give it a shot. With all of that said, why don't we jump into the movie? Better grab your sacrificial chickens, because it's time to watch The Wailing. The movie opens with a quote which says, "They were startled and frightened, thinking they saw a ghost. He said to them, 'Why are you troubled? And why do doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have.'" This quote turns out to be a Bible verse. We get some pretty landscapes and watch a fisherman hook a worm through the credits. Police Sergeant Jong-gu is woken up early to investigate the death of a ginseng farmer, but his wife and mother-in-law make sure he doesn't leave without breakfast. They wonder who would kill someone in their little village, but they hush up when their daughter Hyo-jin enters. Jong-gu drops off his daughter and arrives at the crime scene, and there is a lot going on. People being dragged away, a cop screaming, and a person who is not dead but probably should be. The sick man outside stabbed the farmer and his wife a ton of times, killing them both pretty brutally. They wonder if the murderer is high on something, and we learn the screaming cop is the killer's uncle. They head to the murderer's home, where we learn this is where he killed the farmer, then brought the body back and killed the wife. Jong-gu almost touches a very emphasized dead plant, but gets yelled at back over to the scene where we see the killer's humble abode. His bed kind of looks like a bird nest. Title card. Some guy, I assume is a hunter, has found a dead deer and he slips carrying it and falls down a big ass hill. He wakes up to a naked man feasting on the carcass and hides behind the rock. But the hungry guy is a master at hide and seek and creeps up on the hunter. The hunter survived, and the story has gossiped through the village. Apparently a few people have died or gone crazy in the past weeks, and the locals are blaming a Japanese man who just arrived in town. He was the man that we saw fishing in the opening. Jong-gu doesn't buy all these horror stories and says the murderer had a lot of shrooms in his system, which caused him to kill the farmer and his wife. The power goes out and they are terrified by a naked woman standing outside. Oh, naked lady gone. Jong-gu wakes from a very vulgar nightmare, eats breakfast, fucks his wife in the car, and gets caught by Hyo-jin. He takes her shopping, I suppose to keep her quiet about this embarrassing act. Uh-oh, another crime. This time it looks like a house burned down and a crazed, soot-covered woman is running around screaming. Someone being carried out on a stretcher grabs Jong-gu, and the other woman joins in as well. They are eventually captured and Jong-gu notices the Japanese man staring at him. Hyo-jin drops him off clean clothes at the station and she drops her new hair clip by the door. He goes to pick it up and Jong-gu realizes the woman that burned her house down was the naked woman from last night. The next morning, a woman is found dead hanging in a tree. There are 3 more bodies, all of which were stabbed to death before being burned. The woman who hung herself is the prime suspect, but they have no real idea. Jong-gu has lunch with his friend Byung-yu, who has more gossip for him. Apparently, rumor has spread that the Japanese man, who from here on out I'll just be calling the Stranger, had raped a woman at the river, and apparently that was the woman whose house burned down. Before the fire, a few people had also seen her running around naked, covered in rashes and boils, like the killer from earlier. Now Jong-gu doesn't believe the mushroom story, but his partner Oh Sung-bak isn't so sure now. A woman starts tossing rocks at them, and Oh Sung-bak says she's been doing it all day. Jong-gu sends him to the forensic dermatologist to see if the rashes from the farm murder and hanging lady murder are the same. Some time passes and the woman is much closer to Jong-gu now, but will not respond to his questions. She comes closer and tells him that the woman who lived here hired a shaman who performed a ritual, but something went wrong which got them all killed. She makes her way into the burnt remains and Jong-gu follows. She describes how they died and says that the old woman told her the stranger is a ghost and is sucking the blood from people. She warns him that continuous sightings of him means he's stalking you and he wants your blood as well. He gets a call from Oh Sung-bak, but Jong-gu just tells him to get over here, but the woman has vanished by the time he gets back. He looks for her but only finds the stranger munching on a deer. He is chased through the house and falls and wakes up as the stranger nearly gets him. His wife is there with medicine and tells him Hyo-jin isn't feeling well. He yells at her for not taking her to the hospital and they hear a strange noise on the roof, but don't investigate, I guess. He gets yelled at for being late, which has happened every time he's arrived at work, and his captain tells him he is screwed. Everyone has heard about his supposed witness, and people either think he has lied or he let her get away. The opening murder has been blamed on bad mushrooms, but Oh Sung-bak says the dermatologist wasn't sure what caused the rash on the killer, and he was admitted to the hospital. Jong-gu wants to visit the hunter who saw the stranger in the woods, and they head to his shop. The hunter says he has no reason to make this story up and even shows them his empty freezer, saying he has stayed away from the mountain since. He retells the story to them and even shows where he was apparently bitten. Jong-gu asks where he lives, and the hunter says he should stay away as he too suspects the stranger to be responsible for the recent deaths, but he does offer to show them the way. They head out to the forest and come across the deer carcass he was munching on. A thunderstorm starts and the hunter refuses to go any further. Jong-gu wants him to continue and they get into a scuffle and the hunter once again falls down the rocky hill. He is alive but obviously pissed and threatens to get both of them fired. Then he gets struck by lightning. Maybe he's okay. Or maybe not. Well, he's alive, but his wife isn't very happy. A guard rushes in and tells the nurses something is happening to Hyung-guk, the murderer from the beginning. Jong-gu makes his way up, and it's not looking good as Hyung-guk convulses, coughs up a ton of blood, and eventually dies. The boys drown their troubles in soju and plan to go back to the stranger's house tomorrow. They also notice a woman who has a familiar-looking rash on her neck. That night, Hyo-jin has loud, screaming nightmares similar to her father's, and she tells him a strange man was banging on the door, trying to get inside. I wonder who that could be. The next morning, Hyo-jin seems better. She's even devouring some fish, which she never eats. The mother-in-law heard the screaming last night and plans to consult with a shaman, and Jong-gu agrees to it. Oh Sung-bak has brought his nephew, who speaks Japanese and is also a deacon, which is basically a Christian priest in training. He is here to translate when they find the stranger. They find his home, but he doesn't seem to be there at the moment. They illegally rifled through his things, and Jong-gu breaks into a locked room just as Oh Sung-bak finds a secret hatch. Inside the room is a lot of religious and ritualistic looking stuff, and inside the hatch are a lot of pretty damning photos. Jong-gu saves Yang Yi-sam from the stranger's guard dog, while Oh Sung-bak identifies a few familiar victims and their belongings. The dog breaks loose, and they run inside the house, narrowly keeping it outside. The dog stops attacking, and they see the stranger has returned. He enters his home and tells them to leave. It isn't until the ride back that Oh Sung-bak explains what he saw and shows him a shoe belonging to Hyo-jin. He returns home, and Hyo-jin says the shoe isn't hers. She says she met the stranger, and after being grilled by her father, she starts yelling back and storms out. That night, he sneaks into Hyo-jin's room to look for anything of interest, and finds some increasingly fucked up drawings. He finds the rash developing on her leg, and the now awake Hyo-jin confronts him with lots of expletives and screams. Now everyone's awake, and she threatens to kill them all. The mother-in-law met with the shaman, who believes there is a spirit that has possessed Hyo-jin. Jong-gu finds Yang Yi-sam at his church and brings him back to the stranger's house. He checks the hatch, but all of the photos have been taken down. Through translation, they learn the stranger has burned all of the photos in his kitchen. They ask what he came here to do, but the stranger says they wouldn't believe him if he told them. Jong-gu loses his temper and yells at the stranger, saying he knows exactly what he's doing in the village and to his daughter, and tells him to leave this village quietly while he still can. The stranger doesn't answer, and Jong-gu gets even angrier, breaking down the door to the locked room with a pickaxe. He starts smashing up the worship room, and the dog once again gets loose and attacks him, but Jong-gu wrecks the dog with a pickaxe and gives the stranger 3 days to get out of the village, or he'll end up like his dog. The stranger sits with his still dying dog as the sun sets and crows pick at it. Meanwhile, Hyo-jin was brought to the hospital, and her mother tells Jong-gu that her symptoms are the same as the others who had the rash, and the doctors don't know how to stop it. The next morning, the family has been gifted with a disemboweled goat, and Jong-gu is unable to get up. He is brought to an acupuncturist, and his mother-in-law wants to bring in the shaman tomorrow. Jong-gu is shocked to learn they left Hyo-jin at home with a neighbor, and they rush home to find she has stabbed the woman. She is taken to the hospital, and Oh Sung-bak tells him ever since they went to the stranger's house he has been hallucinating. They agree they have to get him before he gets them, and here comes the shaman. He looks over Hyo-jin and whistles as he looks around the house. He requests to see a big barrel of soy sauce and breaks it open to find a dead crow inside. He says there is a real wicked spirit here and begins a very interesting exorcism, and Hyo-jin, or the spirit inside her, is not a fan. But either way, the exorcism fails. The enraged child eventually passes out, and the shaman Il-gwang asks if Jong-gu has recently disturbed something he shouldn't have. He says it is the strongest evil he's ever encountered, and Jong-gu tells him about the stranger. Il-gwang tells him this isn't a man, but a ghost, and we watch the police retrieve multiple bodies from a well, more victims of the stranger's power. Il-gwang plans to set a death hex tomorrow. That is if Jong-gu can pay 10 grand. Jong-gu agrees, and the shaman tells him this hex is very dangerous to perform, and he absolutely cannot interrupt it in any way. Jong-gu asks how a living person can be a ghost, while the shaman switches into his Nike tracksuit, and he tells him it isn't. Il-gwang says it may have been alive at some point, but now it is more of a demon, and it will destroy the village if it isn't stopped. Jong-gu asks why it wants his daughter, as she hasn't sinned. Il-gwang describes the demon's process as similar to fishing. It releases bait, unsure of what it will catch. Hyo-jin was just attracted by the bait, and that's why it's after her. This conversation happens as the stranger overlooks the body of the man who threw those women in the well as he succumbed to the rash. The next day, the stranger buys some chickens in preparation for a ritual, while the shaman makes preparations of his own. The stranger prays or meditates beneath a waterfall, while that woman who was throwing rocks, simply known as Moo Myung, meaning no name, watches. He returns to his worship room, and he and the shaman are intercut as they perform their rituals. One is very musical and loud, while the other is dark and quiet, although the stranger slowly gets more intense. Hyo-jin tells them to stop, and her discomfort turns to pain. Both men begin slaughtering chickens as Hyo-jin screams. The shaman covers his face in blood and chops down some sort of effigy, and Jong-gu is called by his wife who can't control Hyo-jin. The stranger's ritual is centered around that corpse in the car, as the photo of it begins to melt. Il-gwang drives stakes into the effigy, and it seems to directly hurt Hyo-jin. The stakes begin hurting the stranger as well, who crawls outside. A contorting Hyo-jin and her mother begs them to stop, and Jong-gu runs outside and interrupts the hex. He tells them all to leave, and the nearly dead stranger jolts back to life. He is visited by Moo Mi-young as Hyo-jin is taken to the hospital, and she is not looking good. Yang Yi-sam is there for some reason and says he will speak to the priest at his church. He and Jong-gu meet, and the priest tells him the shaman is wrong about the stranger being dead. He says he is just a living man and dismisses the many rumors about him as paranoia, as nobody has actually seen him commit these crimes or rituals. He tells Jong-gu the church cannot help him and to trust the doctors. Dissatisfied, he asks Yang Yi-sam to come with him to the strangers in the morning to find out if he is truly a ghost. The stranger wakes up and runs out into the woods. Jong-gu has gathered his friends and they are down to kill the stranger. They break into his worship room just as he sees the body in the car is missing. They notice somebody heading their way, and it's the corpse from the car who attacks the group. Yang Yi-sam stops them from killing him. That is until the man bites a chunk out of his face. That gets him a rake to the head, but that doesn't put him down. Then, for seemingly no reason, the man starts convulsing and dies, all while the stranger is watching from the woods. They spot him, and the mob chases him through the forest until he eventually reaches a cliff. But when the mob reaches the cliff, he is nowhere to be found. Jong-gu breaks down in agony, fearing for his daughter. We pan over the cliff to see the stranger is hanging on the side, but he slips and falls to the ground. Byung-gyu hears the fall, but doesn't spot the very upset man. But he is spotted by Moo Mi-young. The men are heading home when a body lands on their windshield, and it turns out to be the stranger. Not wanting to be caught, and possibly just for revenge, they throw his body down the mountain as Moo Mi-young watches from above. Il-gwang notes that a rat has fallen into a trap, and Jong-gu rushes to the hospital where Hyo-jin seems to be recovering. They think it's all over, but there's still half an hour left. Hyo-jin is back home now, and the wife and mother-in-law think the shaman is responsible for saving Hyo-jin. Speaking of... Damn it, Jong-gu. Meanwhile, Yang Yi-sam is having visions of the stranger in the hospital, and soon finds out that Oh Sung-bak has killed his family. Damn. Il-gwang has returned to Jong-gu's and gets a nasty nosebleed. Maybe it has something to do with her. She asks why he is here, and he starts vomiting profusely as well. She tells him to go, and yeah, he does. Jong-gu finally decides to call the shaman back right next to his blood vomit, who has made it home and is busy cleansing his soul. But his candle goes out and a crow flies in, which don't seem like good signs. Jong-gu heads over to his place, but our boy is fleeing to Seoul. Good luck fleeing those fucking bugs, though. Oh shit, they're imaginary. This, for whatever reason, causes him to have a change of heart and head back, calling Jong-gu on the way. He tells Jong-gu to get home to his daughter and that he cast the hex on the wrong ghost. The woman, Moo Mi-young, is actually the evil spirit, and the stranger was trying to kill her and protect the village. Jong-gu realizes who he is talking about and rushes home. Meanwhile, Yang Yi-sam has returned to the stranger's house with a sickle and cross. I guess because he thinks the stranger is still alive and wants to put him down for good. Jong-gu returns home and Hyo-jin is gone. He searches for her but only finds Moo Mi-young, and she toys with him and his questions. She eventually tells him she has returned home, but she warns that if he returns, the whole family will die. She tells him the stranger is still alive as he cannot die, and she has set a trap for him at his home. Yang Yi-sam has found a secret cave. He follows the path and finds the stranger quietly chanting. Moo Mi-young needs him to wait here until the stranger attempts to enter their home so he can be captured. He asks if she is alive or a ghost, but she doesn't answer. The wife and mother-in-law find Hyo-jin at the front gate, and the scary child walks inside and starts binge eating. Yang Yi-sam asks the stranger what his true form is, and he says he thinks he's the devil, and the stranger says he is correct. Il-gwang calls Jong-gu and tells him not to be tempted by her lies and to return home to his family. She tells him the shaman and the stranger are working together, and their rooster will crow 3 times when the demon is snared. The stranger says it doesn't matter if he's the devil or not, as Yang Yi Sam already believes it to be true. Yang Yi Sam disagrees, saying if he can reveal his true form and isn't the devil, he will leave in peace. The stranger laughs maniacally as he doesn't plan on letting Yang Yi Sam leave. He picks up his camera and takes a picture of him. Jong-gu asks why the demon is doing this, and Moo Myung says it's because her father has sinned, and his sin was suspecting the old man, plotting to murdering him, and then eventually succeeding. He doesn't understand as Hyo Jin got sick before the stranger was killed, and the rooster crows a second time. Then he notices his daughter's hairband, and that she is wearing clothing from all of the victims. This leads him to believe she is truly the demon, and he runs home. Jong-gu crosses the gate, and the floral trap Moo Myung set wilts, just like the one he noticed at the first murder. The rooster crows a third time, and Jong-gu finds a blood-soaked kitchen. His wife dies just as he enters, and he turns to find Hyo Jin. He calls his daughter to him as Moo Myung listens. The stranger is taking more pictures of Yang Yi Sam and looks a little different, with red eyes and all. The shaman arrives at Jong-gu's and passes by Hyo Jin. He takes pictures of Jong-gu and his dead family and drops a box back at his car, and it is filled with the photos of the dead villagers that the stranger claimed to have burned. The devastated, possibly dying Jong-gu remembers happier times with his daughter, and the movie ends with him telling her everything will be okay. The end. And that's The Wailing. Damn, I don't even know where to start. This movie covers so much ground, both story-wise and thematically, and what's most interesting is it kind of functions as a build-your-own narrative. The movie has so many purposefully conflicting details, it leaves the viewer unsure of what to believe. Most people pretty much agree on one chain of events, but I've read a bunch of different discussions on it, and everyone's version of the story is a little bit different. This is a quick synopsis of what I think happened to Jong-gu's family and what is pretty much happening to the villagers of the town, but this is just my current interpretation, and it might change in the future, and it's not necessarily correct. A possession begins when the stranger either steals an item from someone and curses it, but it's also very hinted that possession can be transmitted sexually. This is illustrated through the story of the stranger raping the woman who burned her home. It is also suggested that the woman with a rash on her neck is a prostitute, or maybe just a sexually active young woman. Potential evidence of this also exists in Hyo Jin's notebook, which is much darker than him simply stealing her shoe. It's not clear how often she intervened, but this is when Moo Myung would try to help the victim, protecting them by wearing something of theirs and putting up other guards. This is when it gets tricky. Some people believe Il Guang was always working with the stranger, and his ritual is actually allowing the demon to take over its victim. This is possibly evidenced by the remnants of an exorcism that clearly didn't work, but it's also possible that at this point he was good, and Jong-gu's interruption of the ritual allowed the evil spirit to enter the shaman. I lean more towards the two of them always working together. At some pretty vague point, the spirit is able to fully take over a body, and it uses the vessel to kill others, usually family members. Once satisfied, the evil spirit returns to the Japanese stranger, who is its sort of home base. Something unclear is how many bodies the spirit can inhabit at once. It seems the stranger is his human self while the car zombie is active and when he's being chased through the woods. The spirit seems to re-enter his corpse sometime after being thrown down the mountain, but after the murders are committed, either the possessed stranger or Il Guang returns to the scene to document the carnage. The camera seems to be their tool, or at least their metaphor, for capturing souls. In at least the first murder and Hyo Jin's possession, Moo Myung set a trap for the demon. Neither Jong-bu nor someone at the first scene were able to have faith in her, and their disbelief got them and their families killed. After that, it seems the killer dies from the infection and the evil spirit hooks another victim. But like I said, that's just my interpretation. There are enough details in the film to warrant very different interpretations. The movie, fitting into its themes of belief and suspicion, is formed by our own understandings and takeaways from it. The movie has so much going on thematically, the most prominent themes being based in religion. Basically, you can look at Moo Myung and the stranger as good and evil in human forms, and they operate in very similar ways. They are both fighting over the souls of the villagers. One is stealing items and clothing to protect, while the other is using them to possess the owner. Moo Myung operates similarly to Jesus or larger themes of Christianity. Like the idea Jong-gu needs to believe in her without seeing for himself that his family is safe. Whether or not they are literally God and the devil is open to interpretation, but I'm not leaning that way. I think of them both as spirits inhabiting human bodies, one being good and one being a darker spirit. This is why Moo Myung is able to touch Jong-gu at the end, because she actually has a human form. There are tons of nods to Christian texts, like Moo Myung casting stones at Jong-gu, the 3 rooster crows, and of course the quote from the beginning of the film. What's interesting is that the quote, which directly correlates to what the stranger said to Yang Yi-sam, was said by Jesus when he returned to his disciples after rising from death. Not to mention the holes in the stranger's hands and the storm of locusts he sent to Ilgwang. But there's also a ton of inclusion of other belief systems and religions in Korea. About half the country is atheistic, with Christianity and Buddhism taking up the next biggest chunks. But there are obviously others, including Korean Shamanism, an indigenous religion that has seen a revival in the recent years after decades of Christian leaders and government trying to wipe it off the map. From what I can tell, most of the rituals in the film are rooted in these shamanist customs. The point I'm ultimately getting at is the film does not designate one religion as the correct one by the end of the film. It is hinted that the stranger simply took the form of what Yang Yi-sam understood the devil to look like, but then again, that may be the demon's true form. It's also unclear why the stranger targeted Hyo-jin, or any of the people for that matter. Moo Myung says it's because Jong-gu committed sin, while the shaman says it was more or less random. Do you believe the inhuman spirit or the dude working with the devil? This rolls back into Na Hong-jin's original question. When someone dies or a horrible atrocity is committed, some believe it's all part of a larger plan, while some believe there's no reason for it at all. The movie is also asking if we truly know what the difference between good and evil is. What happens when we can't tell the difference? We spend just as much time as Jong-gu being confused about what is truly the evil trying to take his daughter. I'd say most people agree that Moo Myung was good and the stranger was evil, but I've seen arguments for just the opposite and for something in the middle. The beauty of this movie is in its editing and its allowance for us to pick our own meaning from it. You can believe death is part of a good higher powers plan, or that the devil or evil is responsible for it, or it just is completely random. The movie doesn't force an answer onto you. But this is what's so interesting to me. Ambiguity is really difficult to make interesting, and the wailing is completely enthralling throughout and well after the credits roll. I'm excited to rewatch it and see if my theory changes, and that's a quality I love in a horror film. I'm sure it won't be everyone's cup of tea, but I find The Wailing to be a wonderful maze of misleading information. The movie begins as a pretty typical crime thriller, but slowly evolves into a contagion zombie movie and then eventually into the possession ghost story that it truly is. The Wailing also deals with xenophobia and the results of Korea and Japan's complex history. Most notable is Japan's colonization of the country from 1910 to 1945, creating a lot of tension and connection between the two countries. This is part of why this small community is so quick to place blame on the stranger, who they constantly refer to as the Jap. Rumors spread like wildfire, and just like the religious metaphors, we have no idea what information is true or false. The movie starts off with lots of humor, but it slowly slips away through the story as Jong-gu tries to unravel the mysteries in his village. The exorcism scene is one of the most intense I've seen, and the entire movie goes without jump scares, preferring to fill the viewer with dread and uncertainty. It's shot beautifully and full of purpose, all of the acting is top notch, and it'll leave you wanting to talk about it. I hope Na Hong-jin makes another horror movie. I will definitely catch it in the theater. Well, that's about it. There's still a ton I didn't talk about, so if you've seen The Wailing, please ask questions or give me your opinions down in the comments. Did I miss anything? Did you take the film completely different than I did? Please let me know. I want to talk about it. Next week we'll still be dealing with hysteria and Christian metaphors as I'm reviewing The Mist. Thank you all for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and this has been Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of The Wailing. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote in polls for new movies and franchises that I'll be covering in the future. Thanks, y'all.